So, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Nathan Pacini. I am one of the marketing managers at Data Science Dojo. And today I have Greg Camrad with us, and he is the founder of dataindependent.com. And I think you're also a data analyst or a senior analyst, or you work with data professionally for a living, is what I'll say. And you're going to be giving us a crash course on data visualization. You're going to tell a story with your data. And I think to start, we're going to be going through some theory. And at the end, we're going to do a paired coding session with Pandas and Plotly. So, and everybody will be able to follow along with that. We have some CSVs and slides and all of that good stuff to give to everyone. So, Greg, throughout your presentation, whenever you want us to release that, let us know. And then, like I mentioned like a couple of minutes ago, for questions, please use the Q&A tab. We're going to try and save them all for the end. And then if you want that certificate of attendance to show to someone that you did in fact attend a Data Science Dojo webinar, we're going to release that right before we start the Q&A session at the end. So after the paired coding session, but before we start Q&A. And we'll make sure everybody has plenty of time to fill that out. So with that, Greg, why don't you go ahead and take it away, and then I'll interrupt you in case we need something.
Cool. Wonderful. Let's jump right into it. And the way I like to start my presentations is with a story. So in 1372, we all know the Tower of Pisa was opened. Unfortunately, it would become famous for something that it would later regret. Right? And we all know what it is, the tower tips. And we know this as the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Now, if you don't believe me, let me draw some red lines on here to show you, yes, it is in fact tipping next to the ground. Now, the interesting part about this, though, is that the guests of the tower were making a visualization without even knowing it. They were, in fact, helping me make this presentation right now, all those hundreds of years ago, and they didn't even know it. But before we get started, let's clear up what visualization means, because that's a word with a lot of syllables and it might be scary. In my view, a visualization is just a very broad and fancy word for communicating a message through a visual form. And that's a verbose way of saying it's really just a visual that's communicating a message for you. So visualization is not too scary. Now, where does this have to be with the Leaning Tower of Pisa? Well, in that tower, there are some beautiful, beautiful marble steps. And not only are these great pieces of craftsmanship, but there's also a message that is being communicated to us through these steps. And I was looking at this photo and I was thinking, all right, what message am I getting from these steps? And the immediate thing that jumped out to me were these awesome wear marks within the stairs, the marble stairs themselves. And I thought to myself, dang, that's pretty cool. These wear marks are indicating where there was the most foot traffic on these steps. And so it's like, okay, so after all these hundreds of years, the marble is starting to tell us something. So if we were to translate this in a bit more modern terms, this foot traffic data is being communicated to us in a visual form. And using the same definition we just kind of came up with beforehand, that sounds an awful lot like a data visualization. And if you don't believe me that this looks like a data visualization, well, let's break this down and change it a little bit to add some more modern form, and I'll show you. So we have our steps. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to zoom in on one of these steps. And then I'm going to draw a squiggly line that outlines the wear marks. I'm going to throw on some axes onto these steps. So the y-axis is now the amount of wear that we see within this step. And the x-axis is going to be the width of the step. I'm going to throw on some axis labels so I know exactly what I'm looking at. Over here on the left is the lefternmost step location. On the right is the rightmost. And then I'm going to draw a dotted line that says, hey, at this line, there's no wear. However, if you dip down below that, that's when you're going to start to see wear. And no good visualization, we'll see, is complete without a message. And so what am I trying to tell you here? Well, Pisa's steps, they wear down at shoulder height or shoulder width apart. And there's a little bit of emphasis to the right. Now, most modern visualizations don't have photos, so let's take that one out. And then finally, that squiggly line isn't dramatic enough for me. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to exaggerate that scale a little bit more. And then all of a sudden, we have a data visualization derived from marble steps about the wear patterns within the stairs of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Awesome. Thank you for entertaining my story opener. My name is Greg Camrad, and I am the founder of Data Independent. And this is a presentation on telling stories with your data. Now, that is a huge topic, and we could go in probably a whole semester on just that, but we're going to dig into the data visualization theory and practice part of it. So we're going to dive into a code sample and take a look at some of this applied here. Now, the very first thing, and the only thing, if you're going to walk away with one thing today, it is that the goal of a business visualization, emphasis on business, is to inspire action within your audience. Now, you may look at me and say, hey, Greg, wait a minute. I thought it was to make a pretty looking chart. Nah. Or like, hey, Greg, I thought it was to do some really cool data science and like bring out this cool thing. Nah. In a business setting, generally the data and the analytics team are going to be helping stakeholders make a decision, and you want to inspire action within your audience. So I'll go as far as to say, if your visualization is not creating action or making or helping a decision within your stakeholders, then it may not be doing the job that you want it to be. Now, why is this hard? And why is this difficult? Well, because visualizations are two parts, and you can't really have them, can't have a visualization on either of them. And it is the classic, almost trite example of visualizations are going to be art, which is how you create your story and the message that you actually want to send to your stakeholders, mixed in with the science. And this is where you're going to be visually mapping quantitative information over to visual dimensions. And I know that that science piece is a bit verbose, but we're going to step through that. And the key thing here is that you're not really able, or it's very difficult to create impact without having both of these here. And so what I want to do is I want to dig into both of these. First, let's start off with the science piece. And this is where we're going to map quantitative information, numbers, basically, into visual dimensions. And this is figures and shapes and charts and things that we can visually see. And we're going to step through this going through a single dimension, double, and triple dimensions. Let's look at an example. This will be much more clear. And so what we're going to do is with this single dimension mapping, we're going to start off with a quantitative piece of information, and we're going to translate that over to the visual side. All right. So very first, let's look at one dimension of a quantitative piece of information. We're going to look at a single number. And so this number is number 55. Cool. Now, in order to translate that number 55 into a visual dimension, I have a choice. How do I want to do that? And well, I chose this time to have the number 55 correlate to the length of the bar that I'm showing here. So this number 55 is 55 length, whatever that means, of this bar. And that's mapping a single dimension to a single visual dimension. Now, if that seems kind of confusing, it's probably because it's so basic. Let's look at two dimensions, which would be more clear. So for two dimensions, not only do I have numbers that I'm representing here, but I also have separation of data points, which is another dimension showing me where the separation is. And well, my first dimension is going to be a number, and my second dimension is going to be some aptly picked emojis to represent those. So here's our quantitative information. And then on the visual side, we've now still kept the length of the bar is going to correlate to the number. So the 55 is 55 length, whatever that means. 45 is in the same proportion to the 55, but a little bit shorter. Then you have your 25, and then you have your 5. But the other dimension that we're mapping here is actually going to be the separation of these emojis. And so the bar Y position shows how these different data points differ from each other. So the 55 is separate from the 45, is separate from the 20, is separate from the 5. Cool. And that's mapping two quantitative dimensions to your visual. Let's go ahead and look at our third example, which is mapping 3 dimensions. So for 3 dimensions, I'm going to put together a quick table here. And these are some fictitious companies with their revenue, employees, and market cap, completely just made up numbers. And so I have 3 dimensions here: revenue, employees, and market cap. I'm going to skip the separation one just for clarity here. And I'm going to map these over to visual. Now, the way I chose to do this is one of my favorite charts, which is a scatter plot. And I'm going to translate revenue into X position. So that's where it sits on its X axis. The employees is going to be its Y position, where it sits vertically in this chart. But then the cool part is that our 3rd dimension that we're mapping is going to be the size. So the market cap is correlated to the size. So the lake is the biggest one, and you can see Tahoe here is the smallest one. Now, just like I have an axis for my X and Y, I also have an axis for the side or the size. So you can see here I stuck 3 different market caps, and I probably should have put some numbers on there, but I kept this more simple. I'm showing that the bigger the number, the bigger the market cap. Cool. Now that's mapping 3 dimensions quantitatively to the visual side in 3 visual dimensions. But I found an example of a pretty crazy chart that I wanted to share. Now, this is a chart from the New York Times newspaper, and this is New York City's weather in 2003. Now, the first thing I think about when I look at this is first, wow, that's beautiful. And it's beautiful because it shows so much information in such an elegant way. But then 2 is like, holy moly, that's a lot of dimensions. And I tried going through and counting them, and I probably did miss some, but we'll see what we can count here. So first off, they're showing us the Y on the top chart is going to be your temperature. They're showing us precipitation and rainfall. They're showing us a time dimension with months. Not only that, they're going really crazy, and they're using color coding to show us highs, lows, and ranges. They're showing us days, so a secondary time dimension, which is pretty sweet. And then they're showing us different data callouts. So record rainfall or normalized rainfall, whatever that may be. And so as you see here with the science side of data visualizations, it's all about taking your data and mapping it to a visual dimension. Okay. What I want to do next is I want to talk about the artistic side of creating these data visualizations. And in this one, we get much more emphasis on presentation and storytelling. Now, the first key part in here, which is really the umbrella point that I want to communicate, is you have huge flexibility in your presentations to emphasize your story. And what I mean by that is you as the data analyst or you as the data person with your stakeholders, there's a reason why you don't give them an Excel spreadsheet and say, go have fun. And the reason why is because they don't want to go and read it, and they want you to tell them what they need to do. So you need to summarize that story. And with that comes the creativity about how you're going to present that. Okay. So in order to emphasize this, what I want to do is go through a very simple exercise. And what I've done here is I've created 3 different charts, and all 3 of these charts show the exact same underlying data. And the question is which scale is correct. And when I say scale, what I mean here is that the only difference between these charts is that the y-axis has different ranges, has a different scale. So for example, in the leftmost chart, that scale is 3.9% to 4.5%. And we're looking at conversion rates here. The middle chart, we have 0% to 100%. And then we have 0% to 4.5%. And the big question, and the one that you're going to have to answer as a data artist, is really, what's the correct scale? And sorry to spoil it, but the answer is that there is no right answer. And the reason why there is no right answer is because it completely depends on the story you're telling. So the points that you choose to emphasize are going to depend on the message that you're trying to send. And if you're going to say, hey, Greg, here's my data, what's the right scale? I'm going to say, I have no freaking idea. What are you trying to communicate to your stakeholder? What do you want them to know about your visual cue here? I see the questions popping up. I'm going to skip those for now. So Nathan, tell me if I need to zoom in on anything there. So there's no right answer on this. Now, to further emphasize that there's no right answer, let's see how the narrative of your story could precipitate one of these charts. So if my main message over here on the left one was, man, our conversion rates have grown massively. Well, this chart is a pretty good one to show because it's really emphasizing the gain in conversion rates. And you can visually see that. The middle one, well, I could be saying, hey, our conversion rates are still super, super, super small. And if you're trying to have a conversion rate of 75% or something, you may want to emphasize how you're still down at around the 4% level by visually showing the gap between your point and your 75%. And then for the last one, your message could be, hey, we're a long way from where we were a few months ago at 0% conversion rate. So this is really emphasizing the skip or the jump from 0 all the way up to your 4% conversion rates. Awesome. Now, in terms of things to watch out for when you're applying your artistic creativity to your charts, one of those is you don't want to overload your viz. So sometimes I'll call them novice data visualizers will overload their charts by stuffing it with a bunch of visual dimensions. So not only do we have height here, we have different groups, but then we have different subgroups as well. And these subgroups are extremely hard to decipher, and I cannot pull any message from these at all. Now, if the subgroups aren't a part of your overall message, why the heck are they in your visualization in the first place? Don't do it just to make yourself feel cool and like you're doing work. Remember, you have to do this to communicate a message. Okay. The other thing that I watch out for is going to be redundant visual dimensions, that these cause confusion. Now, redundant visual dimensions, another verbose word. What does this mean? Well, it means visual dimensions that are showing the same information. Let's look at examples of these. The very first one is going to be a very common example I see quite often. And it's going to be when you're showing an area chart like you're doing right here, but you'll notice that the color is it's showing the exact same information as the y-axis, which is basically, hey, the further up you go on the y-axis, the more the color is going to change. So this color and the y-axis are showing me the same thing. Now, it may look pretty, and if your goal is to have it look pretty, then mission accomplished, but it's not very helpful from a business context. And frankly, redundant dimensions can be confusing because my mind immediately goes to, okay, wait, what are they trying to show me with the color? Wait, that looks like it's the same thing as the y-axis. How do I reconcile these two? One more example of these is going to be a bar chart. So you can see here again that they change the color in accordance to the bar chart position. So not only does the bar length show the magnitude, but also the color shows the magnitude as well, which again is pretty, but it's not extremely helpful for me right here. Sweet. Well, I tell you what, that was the theory part of our presentation today. And what we're going to step into together here is we're going to make a chart together. Now, before we get into any code, before we get into any visualizations, we need to start with our goals, the place where all good projects start, which is at the very, very end. Now, my goal for this visualization we're about to make is I'm going to have a single message, and I'm going to make that message extremely clear. I'm going to do that by communicating my message not only in visuals, but also in plain English. I'm not going to use redundant visual variables. You'll be able to see that. Don't worry. And then finally, I'm going to keep it simple. So I'm going to emphasize what's important. I'm going to really draw attention to what I want the audience to know. And I'm going to cut what's not important. Okay. Now, because this is a business setting and because you likely have stakeholders, let's start with a stakeholder prompt, if you will. So what you've been asked for by your stakeholders is, we'd like to understand the mix of the most profitable companies in the Fortune 1000. And specifically, which industries are most prevalent? And luckily, we have a curated data set waiting for us that we're going to jump into, which is going to be in a Google Colab Notebook. And I saw that the Drive resources were just shared. So if anybody wants to speed ahead, they can go and do that. If not, I'm going to walk through it. And in this Drive notebook, in fact, let me just go ahead and show you what you have here. In this Drive notebook, you're going to have 4 different files, one of which is the data set, one is the slides that we were just looking at, and one is going to be the Google Colab Notebook that we were just looking at ourselves. Beautiful. Well, I tell you what, Nathan, let me pause here for questions and give you some space in case we should ask any. If not, I'll just continue forward.
Yeah, we just had one question that was about one of your slides when you were talking about the different charts, and I remember one of them had to do with conversions. That one, yep. And it's this is from Tushar, and they are saying, should the scale always include the min and max, even if there are exceptions?
Oh, good question. And I hate to throw it on the same answer as beforehand, but if the min and max are important for the story you're trying to tell, then yes. Now, that's the technically correct statement that I believe. However, min and max are extremely helpful for orienting your data. Now, sometimes if your min and max are way too extreme and they're all over the place, some people remove those data points altogether, so their min and max become a little bit shorter. So do they always have to? Absolutely not. Are they helpful? Yes. It completely depends on the story you're trying to tell. Awesome, Nathan. I'll just jump right into it then. Cool. So what we're going to be doing here is we are going to be pair programming, and it's more going to be a one-way programming because I'm just going to go straight for it. And we're doing this via a Google Colab Notebook. I like these notebooks because I can share them with you very easily, and you can go in here and play with them yourself. I've mixed in some text here to add some more aid for us. The key point I want to message here is this is not a tutorial on a line-by-line explanation on how individual things are working. This will be a tutorial on how we map the theory that we just learned via code to a visual chart. So if anybody has questions around line-by-line things, let's sync up afterwards and we can chat more about that. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. We're first going to import our libraries, and my libraries of choice are going to be Pandas. And in fact, on Data Independent, I put up like 70 Panda tutorials. So this is my data processing library choice. And then today we're going to use Plotly. Doesn't matter which visual library you use. Absolutely not. Go use Matplotlib, Seaborn, Plotly, whatever the heck you want. This one will be in Plotly because I like their hover material, which is kind of nice. Cool. So with our prompt that we got from our stakeholders, what we're going to go ahead and do is I'm going to create a scatter plot that takes care of 4 visual dimensions. We're going to deal with an x-axis, which is going to show our revenue. We're going to show our profit. We're going to show our market cap, which is going to be the size of our scatters. But then one other interesting one that we're going to throw in there is we're going to have a binary yes, no. Is this a finance or technology company? And we're going to have this be the color that we're going to show. And the reason why we're doing this one specifically is because our stakeholders are interested about which industries were most prevalent in the most profitable companies. And I did my homework before this, and I know it's finance or technology, so I want to go ahead and communicate that. If anybody wants to follow along with this specific one themselves, there's a little trick to get your Pandas data to read via a hosted CSV. So here is that CSV that was in that Google Drive folder I just shared with you. What's really cool is I can just throw in this URL into read CSV. Let me go ahead and run this. And all of a sudden, let me go ahead and run data.head. Here's that data that was hosted for us. So going through this just very briefly, we have a whole bunch of columns. We don't need all of these. I care about things like company. I care about their profit. I care about their revenue. What else do I care about? A few other things in here. So I want to clean this up, and I don't want to have all these. The way I'm going to clean that up is I'm just going to take a subset of columns. So I'm going to take company, revenue, profit, sector, market cap, and I'm going to rename my market cap. And with this rename of market cap, let's look at our resulting data, which is much more clean. Now, in order for us to understand, I didn't code this one in here, but let me do that just for fun. Let's see how many data points we have of our data set. We have 950 companies. And to make this really explicit, let's do print. We have companies in our data set. And so with this one, this will just be more explicit. So it's more self-service. And this is what you get for live coding. I tell you what, I'm not even going to worry about this right now. In fact, I'll just fix that up before because I'm not going to go debug right now. Great. So we have our data that we're doing right here. And next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go create a few more helper columns. So with these helper columns, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a color column to my data frame. And I'm going to add a indicator column, which is top industry. Now this color one, what it's going to go do is it's going to go see if the sector is in finance or technology. And if so, it's going to give me one color here. If not, it's going to give me one color here. Now, in order to help us for our labels, I'm going to create a similar one for is top industry. I'm going to go ahead through the same sector, financials and technology. If it's a yes, give me a string yes. If it's a no, then give me a string no. Go ahead and run those. Okay, cool. And so what we have here is we have our color column and we have our top industry column, which are going to be helpers for us in a little bit. Okay, so all of that is what we need to do in order to transform our data to get it ready for our scatter plot, which this is the fun part. Now, what I chose to do here is we're going to build out a really cool looking scatter plot, but I want to start small so you can see how this incrementally builds up, and I can talk through the different examples about why I chose to include certain things. So let's go ahead and let's make our first scatter plot. Now, I apologize. I am going to zoom out just a little bit here so that we're able to see some code and some visuals at the same time. If anybody wants to follow along because this is too small, please open up the Colab Notebook. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to call plotly.scatter. What's really nice is I can pass my data frame, and then I can just pass a simple string, which represents the column in the data frame. So I'm basically telling Plotly here, hey, I want my x-axis to be revenue, and I want my y-axis to be profit. And then figure.show to show the chart for us. And what's cool is we have our y as profit, we have our x as revenue, and we can see a bunch of companies here. And oh, cool, there's some hover capabilities. And this is exactly what we wanted to use Plotly for because, well, it's just nice. And so we can see this one way over here. It has a revenue of 523 grand, which is why it's all the way out over here. And this is actually an example where I might cut this data point if it's not a part of my message because I want to further emphasize these, but that's outside of scope here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start to add to our chart, and we're going to incrementally build out more aspects of this visualization. The first thing that I want to do is I want to add a certain chart width in there. Now, the reason why I want to add the chart width is because it's kind of sloppy to have it so big, and it's a little unwieldy, more unwieldy than I'd like. So I'm going to add in a height, and I'm going to add in a width and a height, which is just going to set the bounds of my chart here, which is nice. Cool. The next thing is, if you remember up at the top, we wanted to talk about size. And so the size of our data points. And the column that I want to use for side is going to be our market cap column within our data frame. Because you'll notice here that all these different points, they're all the same size. And it doesn't give you much extra information where it would be helpful to understand how big they are. So I'll go ahead and I'll do that. Oh, sweet. So now we can see here that this market cap of this company is much bigger than zooming in, say, on this market cap of this company. Nice. So there's a little extra information that's embedded in here to help us understand the size of these companies. Nice. Next, I want to add a color. So remember, I wanted to emphasize which industries were part of which dots were part of which industries. And I specifically made a helper column to tell me which one were finance and which one were technology. I'll go ahead and run that. And nice. That's pretty sweet. So all of a sudden I split out, is this a technology and finance company? Yes, then it's going to get the red. Or is this not a technology and finance company? And then it's going to get the blue. And what you can see here is all of a sudden, you can see that all of our most profitable companies are red. Now I know there's one that's sneaking in right there, but that doesn't count. Technically doesn't count. Okay, cool. So that's where we're going to be. Now I just zoomed in on here, which is another cool thing of Plotly, but I'm going to double click to zoom back out. Now, the other kind of confusing thing is you can see over here in the legend is top industry. And I want yes on top and I want no on the bottom. And luckily Plotly has a very helpful convention for that is, and you can tell it your category orders. So I'm saying, hey, for my, oh, I need to switch that. For my is top industry column, yes comes first and then no. So let's go ahead and run that. Now, all of a sudden you can see that the yes is on top, which is sweet. Cool. Next thing is it's really hard for me to tell which company this is because it doesn't have the company name in the hover. Well, that would be helpful to have the hover, the company name in the hover. The way you do that is you add a hover data attribute. So with hover data, I'm saying, hey, go give me the company. Let me go run this. Nice. So now we hover over it and you can see the company is going to be labeled at the bottom of this hover tooltip. So this is Berkshire Hathaway. This is Apple. This is Amazon. This is Alphabet. This is Microsoft, etc. Cool. The next thing I want to fix here is this in top industry label. That's data speak. That's not necessarily stakeholder speak. And then profit is not bad, but I want to capitalize the P. And I want to say company profit, same thing with revenue. I want to capitalize those. And the cool part is Plotly makes this extremely helpful with a convention called labels. And with labels, all you need to do is just pass a dict. And with this dict, you give it a key of your column name, and then you give it the label you want to call it. So I want to call revenue, company revenue. I want to call profit, company profit. And I want to call top industry. I'm going to phrase it as a question. Is this technology? In fact, let's just label it like that. Is this technology or financial? Cool. So we have that. And so our company profit worked, our company revenue worked. You can see is top industry didn't work. And the reason why is because I passed it a bogus column name that it didn't know about. And then there we go. So with that one, we've now rephrased this to our legend. Is this a technology or financial industry? Yes is blue. And then red is no. Nice. The other thing here too is much like all good visualizations that we were just talking about beforehand, I really want to drive home the point and the message I want you to take away from this and specifically answer the stakeholders question. And the way I'm going to do that is by adding a title to this chart. So with title, I'm going to say, hey, my title equals technology and financial companies are the Fortune 500 1K most profitable industries. Let's go ahead and do that. Boom. Now we have our title right on top of our chart. So what's kind of funny about this, and it's a good way to know if you're doing your job or not. Let's just say you only had the title and you didn't have the chart. Would you be able to glean the message from this? And because I literally put the takeaway right in the title, I'm hoping the audience will be able to do this. Cool. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to continue to drive this home even further and make this as much of a no-brainer as possible. And you saw me highlight this middle section beforehand. Well, I'm not going to be there to present this to my stakeholders. I want this chart to be able to speak on its own. And the way I'm going to do that is add annotations to the chart that really call this out for me. Now, traditionally, I'd probably do this in a Google Slides or some sort of like presentation software. It's a little bit difficult to do this within Code, but at least Code has us do this programmatically. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to call my figure within Plotly, and I'm going to say, hey, go add a shape for me. And what kind of shape do I want? I want a rect, which is short for rectangle. Now, what's cool is that you give it an X0 and a Y0, which is basically one corner, and then a Y1 and an X1, which is another corner. And you can also pass it a color that you want your rectangle to be. I'll go ahead and run this. Nice. That is pretty cool. And you can see here that the lower bounds of this rectangle are a little tight for me. And so I'm going to raise that just a little bit by starting it off at 19.5 instead of 19 flat. And that came up just a little bit. Nice. Cool. Well, calling out a rectangle doesn't do anything for me because the audience is going to be like, what the heck is this rectangle for? Why are you calling this out? And in order to further emphasize what this rectangle is and why it's important, I'm going to add a shape and then a piece of text. The shape is going to be a line, shocker, add another shape. This is going to be a line, specify where it starts and where it ends, and then give it another color, which is cool. But then the key part is I'm going to add some context to this chart. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to add text to this chart. So I'm going to say the top 10 most profitable companies are technology That doesn't really make a ton of sense. The top 10 most profitable companies are in technology or financial. Let's do that. That feels a little bit better. Nice. And these BRs, these are breaks in your line, and it's a little bit of HTML that Plotly lets you put in there. So there'll be a line break after each of these. And in fact, let me just show you what it looks like without the line break so you can see why I did that in the first place. So if we go ahead and run this, cool. The top 10 most profitable companies are in technology or financial. Awesome. But you can see here how it's kind of stretching all over the place. I wish it would wrap a little bit more. And so I'm going to add in some line breaks. Cool. That's much easier for us to digest and look at. Nice. So the next thing, let's see, do I have anything else? No. So that's our chart for right now. We could go freaking crazy and do a whole bunch of wild things. But what I'm going to do here is I want to share this chart with the world. And I want the entire world to see it. So I'm going to go ahead and take this. I'm going to head over to Twitter. I'm going to head over to Data Indie. I'm going to tweet out, hey, just made this chart with @DataScienceDojo, and it was awesome. What charts have you made recently? Nice. Hey, make sure that's good. Looks good. Tweet that out. Fabulous. And this is a small plug, but go and follow me on Twitter. And this is where I post things not only about data, but then also around data careers and kind of analysis about the data industry as well. And with that, that is our chart. And Nathan, what do you know? We're right at 39 minutes in. So
perfect. A little early.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we get into Q&A, because we do have some questions, and I want to give people time to type out questions if they have them. Again,
Nice.
Please use that Q&A tab. So I'm going to take the screen from you for a second, and I am going to talk about our webinar next week really quick.
There you go.
And then we will get into Q&A for everyone and release that certificate, which I'm sure people are here for. All right, so hopefully you can see the screen, but next week, July 6th at noon Pacific time, so the same time as today, we will be having Bill Franks, the Director of Chief Analytics Officer for Statistics and Analytical Research at Kennesaw State University. And he's going to be presenting Winning the Room, Creating and Delivering an Effective Data-Driven Presentation, which is pretty close to what we did here today. And it kind of lines up great. So if you really liked Greg today, I would definitely suggest joining next week with Bill Franks. And then team, Data Science Dojo team, why don't you go ahead and release that certificate for people to fill out the form for. We will post it multiple times, so don't worry if you don't see it the first time, and it will be live at least for another 20 minutes. So plenty of time to fill that out. And with that, let's get into some Q&A. And
Nice.
Greg, you're probably going to want to share.
Can we share my screen?
Yeah, share your screen. I think because some of these are relevant to the collab sheet and everything. So first, this is from an anonymous attendee, and it's perfectly okay to be anonymous. It means I don't get to butcher your name when I say it. How to make sure your desired question doesn't create bias in the chart?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's no point in making the chart if your question is off or if your mission is off in the very first place. And so let me write, how to make sure your desired question doesn't create bias in the chart. So this is all around stakeholder management, which unfortunately is a much larger topic. But before you even go and make your visualization, you want to help your stakeholders understand, will the question that they're asking actually drive home the point that they want to get towards? The quick helpful tips that I do for this is asking, what are their priorities? What are their pain points? What are their mission? Like, what's their risk? What is their goal for the company or the department about what they're working on right now? Because sometimes they'll say, I want to increase more users. And then they'll ask a question that say, let's just say they ask a question that isn't relevant to increasing more users. And you would have not, you would have maybe misused some of your time going down that route. So there's a whole nother skill of a data analyst to help your stakeholders clarify their own thinking to make sure that your work is going in the right direction. So how do you make sure the question doesn't make the chart? Make sure there's no bias in the question in the first place before you even make the chart.
Yeah. And then Isaac, and this is, I guess, related to the files we just shared with everyone. Are we going to have access to the Google Colab Notebook after the webinar? I don't see why not, but
let me just show you right here. Google Colab, share. Anyone with the link can view. So if you don't, please let me know, and you should.
Yeah, and we will on our website as well as on YouTube and literally everywhere else we post this this recording, as well as in the email that we send to people with the recording. We'll have the Google Drive, either the URL or all the individual files, we'll have as resources. So you will be able to have access to those. All right. And Nisha is asking, how do you know that you have to choose financials and technology sector? And I think that was outlined in the question that you were answering.
Yeah, it's a great question. I skipped over that part. I skipped over the analysis part of that because that would have been overloading the presentation. But just to go into it super briefly, if I'm looking at my DF right here and I say sort values by, and I'm going to say profit, and then I got to say ascending equals false to look at it. I literally just sorted by this, and I saw that the top 10 were all technology. Well, I guess there's one communications in here, but they're all technology or financial. So I did this work beforehand. I wanted to skip over that for you.
And all right, so Nisha, great question. This is from Betty, and Betty has two questions. So the first one is, this was while you were going through the Colab Notebook, but I'm not exactly sure when.
I think I know.
Yeah, is access equals 1 referring to the second column of the data set?
Great question. So that came up in this df.rename, and this is when you rename columns. Well, let me rephrase. In Pandas, they let you rename an index. So this rename function renames an index. Well, in Pandas, you have 2 indexes. Well, 2 or more. You have your rows and you have your columns. And so Pandas needs to know, hey, do you want to rename a row? Do you want to rename a column? And access equals 1 is their confusing way of telling them, hey, go rename a column. Don't go rename a row, because there's no row named market cap. Nice. And then the second question I see here.
Yep. And then Betty's second question is, can we add a legend on the scale of market cap to see the min and max?
Nice. Means we want to rename the column. So can we add a legend to the scale of market cap to see the min and max? We could, absolutely. In fact, that'd be pretty helpful. I didn't pull that out for this one. So what Betty's asking for is, in addition to this legend that we have right here, is there a way where we could have circles and show the size of the market cap correlated to those circles? I'm absolutely sure that you can. I didn't include in this presentation. That would be really fun. And in fact, Betty, what I would love is if you figured it out, please tweet at me the answer to that, and everyone else, which would be fun.
Perfect. And then another anonymous attendee is asking, there are 2 parts to this question as well. Which package/software do you use the most for data visualization? And what is your view on Tableau and Power BI? Nice.
So for data visualization, it may seem like the fancier the tool, the more impact you're going to create. However, Nathan, we could probably do a whole nother presentation on this, but like,
yep.
the amount of impact you create is 95% your strategy and your communication and your analysis. 5% of it is your visuals. Now, the reason why I say that is because you could have the fanciest visualization out there. If it doesn't mean a thing to your stakeholders, then you haven't done a job well done. So I'm prefacing your question with that. Which one do I use the most for data visualization? Honestly, I'll use Excel sometimes, because I've done all my data transformations and all my thinking and all my strategy and all my research and all my analysis beforehand. And what's the result is a nice, clean data set that I can simply put in Excel, or I could simply put a chart on very easily. Now, if I'm jumping over to Python, I'm usually using Pandas and Matplotlib. Matplotlib only because it's so simple. And then for the second part of the question, what's my view on Tableau and Power BI? I think it's completely up to personal preference for the practitioner on what they use. There's Looker, there's Amplitude, there's Heap, there's Mixed Panel, there's Mode, there's Tableau, there's Power BI. Really, it's tomato. And instead of worrying about the tool per se, I would double down on your strategy and your analysis to help communicate that.
And we actually had someone in the chat say that exact same thing that you just said. So, and then Shabazz is asking, where do I see the form to fill out? So Fatima, if you can post the certificate form again. Shabazz, you can see that in the chat. And then just click on that and it'll take you to the form to fill out. Nisha is back and she is asking, the choice of scale for the visualization can also create bias, no?
So yes, and the reason why, if we go back to that one, it's a really cool point. The reason why it creates bias is because you are influencing the message that is being told in your data visualization. But that's actually a good thing. Now, generally in a business environment, there's trust between the data person and the stakeholder. And when there's trust, the stakeholder trusts you to communicate the message that is best for the business. Now, the scale that you use is how you influence how that message is told to help derive a decision. Now, let's say, for example, your stakeholder, it was a zero trust environment. They may say, all right, I want the raw data. I'm going to interpret the scale on what I need to use myself. So yes, there's bias, but that's by design. And that's actually a good thing. And that's what you get paid the big bucks for, is to interpret the data and create the message from it.
Okay. And then we have an anonymous attendee saying, I had a mentor recommend not using Python as charts to stakeholders because it's not flexible. What are your thoughts when presenting?
So there's two things here. One, when you're just making charts, use whatever tool is going to work for you. Excel, Python, R, whatever the heck. But the second part here is my thoughts on presenting. Absolutely. Whenever I'm presenting to a stakeholder, I'm not jumping in code because they don't care about the code. They care about the data and the story that comes with it. And most often I'm going to throw it in Google Slides like this because I'm very comfortable in here, or else I'm going to put it in a doc, like a Notion or like a Google Doc. So you're right. I don't use Python to present to stakeholders.
And then another anonymous attendee. So I'm not sure if this is the same person or if we're about to have 4 questions from 4 different anonymous people. But does having a background in software development / engineering offer a better foundation for someone considering to get into data engineering or science? I see a lot of Python and Python, I think DSA going on from the presentations. I think it certainly helps, but.
Yeah. So I'm only pulling up something for us all to look at right here. Nathan, I'm going to share one more link with you. I'm not sure where the best place is to share it, but I'm just going to.
Sure.
2 panelists. I'll let you share that out. So I actually wrote a whole FAQ doc with like 20 questions around, should I join a data bootcamp? And one of them is around the technical side. And so the question is basically, does having a background in software development or engineering offer a better foundation to someone getting into data science or engineering? Now, does it offer a better foundation? Sure. I mean, you learned a technical thing and now you're trying to learn a technical thing. That being said, I don't have an engineering background. My background's in finance and I learned Python along the way. So you don't need, it's not a requirement to have it, but if you're trying to get into some hardcore engineering, then of course, if you're formally trained in engineering, it's going to be a big leg up. Now, if you're not formally trained in engineering, no big deal. There's a lot of resources and programs out there like Data Independent, like Data Science Dojo that can help you along your journey.
And then is the key here, and this is another anonymous attendee, and I think they're referring to the Google Colab, is the key here to become a Genius Plotly user?
No, I mean, Plotly, use whatever the heck you want. In my view, the important parts are to know, hey, I need a title. Hey, I need to separate the colors. Hey, I need to do all this. And all the attributes about this chart, the library that you use, completely up to you. Use whatever the heck you want, but don't skimp on the theory behind there or the strategy behind your visualization.
Okay, and I just lost my place, but I found it again. And how does Plotly compare with D3 or other visualization tools like Tableau?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, these are just awesome questions. And apologies, I'm going off screen real quick, but I think this will be worth it because I'm going to bring something up here. So I actually had a chart exactly on this. When you look at visualization libraries, in fact, let me present this. When you look at visualization libraries, you have to balance, are they easy or are they hard to use or learn? And then how rigid are they and how flexible? When I say how rigid they are, that means that how much do you have to play by their rules to get the visualization that you want? D3 is going to be up in the top right. It is so flexible to do whatever you want. It's also one of the hardest visualization libraries to know. So how does it compare? Plotly is somewhere in the middle where it's not super hard and it does offer you some flexibility, which is nice. Again, they both can likely do the same things. It just depends on what you're most comfortable with, because you don't want to toil around with a library. You want to get a visualization out. So use whatever's right for you.
Okay, and then we had another Tableau or Power BI question come in on the chat. So I just want to hit that while we're kind of on that topic. How do you put this great presentation in something like Tableau or Power BI? So if they were to take the Google Colab and put it into Tableau or Power BI, is there an easy way of doing that?
It's a good question. I've never done that. I'm not really a Tableau or Power BI person, so I've never done that. I'd start with a Google search and hopefully there's something nice for us.
That would be my suggestion too, because I also have no experience with it.
Yeah.
And then Penelope wants to confirm that Python was used during the presentation. So the Google Colab is in Python.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, definitely, it was used.
And then my colleague is saying that I should mention we do have an upcoming another crash course on designing a dashboard in Tableau. Fatima, if you could share the details in the chat with everyone, I'm sure whoever is having questions on Tableau would appreciate that, because I just don't know them off the top of my head, and we still have quite a few questions to get through in a little bit amount of time. So
nice. Yeah.
Nandini, and I really apologize if I say your name incorrectly. What are the ways to make our visualization to be more interactive using Python libraries?
Yeah, my first question, which is like, what does interactive mean exactly? Next question is if it just means having your external person interact with the chart. Well, Plotly is actually a pretty sweet job for that. You just have to host it for somewhere, because this is on a Colab notebook. It's tough for somebody else to see into this. What's nice is Plotly has a lot of interaction controls. So you can use things like filters and ranges and scales and things like that. And of course, there's hovers right here. If you want other interactions as well, that's outside of Python, one place I'd recommend is Google's Data Studio. That is actually a pure dashboarding tool and it's free. And the ROI on free is pretty high, and it's not bad for free at all. So I'd recommend checking Google Data Studio.
All right, perfect. And then Sam is saying, as someone who primarily uses Excel for visualization currently, the coding can seem like a lot to take in. How easy is it to find commands you need, like the color coding industries or changing size of industry?
To find the commands you need, I'm assuming that's how to find them in Python and in Plotly. And it is super, I mean, it's super simple. There's a lot of places to do it. The documentation is the best way to go look for it. And you could just Google like scatter plot size Plotly, and you're going to get your answer right then and there. The thing that I will say, for people who primarily use Excel, the jump from Excel to Python is much, much smaller than you would guess. If you think about it, in Excel, you're already familiar with a tabular data set, which is just rows and columns. You're already familiar with formulas. You're already familiar with chaining together formulas and if statements and conditionals. So this might be a little dramatic, but you're like 60% the way to learning Python if you feel good about Excel. And honestly, that's where I started in my first place. I was in finance using Excel and I jumped over to Python.
Okay. And then somebody is asking about the Google Colab, specifically a Google Colab account. I think you just need to have a Google account to use Colab. Is that right? Or I've never used it, so.
Nice. Yeah, you just need a Google Colab account, and it's just like any other Drive document. So like a spreadsheet or a doc or whatever. It's really nice.
And is the account free to create?
Yeah. Oh yeah. A Gmail, a Google account is free to create. Absolutely.
Right. So yeah. So Rob, I think that was your name. Yeah. So just create a free Google account, and then you should be able to access that Google Colab. And then, are you okay, Greg, with going a little over time? I have a couple more questions that I want to try to get to, but if you need to run, because we want to be respectful of your time. So
Absolutely.
If you have to run to a meeting or something, we can definitely end here. And
I tell you what, I have a hard stop at 1:10. Okay. So let's go 10 minutes over.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so, and we answered Sam's question. And then Nandini again is asking how to include data labels with each data point instead of hovering over them.
Yeah. So the question is like basically how do you get a piece of text underneath each data point here? You could do that a few ways. I think Plotly gives you one out of the box that you can just attach in your scatter plot. I'm not exactly sure about the command, and so I'm not going to look for it. The other thing you could do is you could manually add annotations. So just how I added a text annotation right here, you could create a for loop that basically says like for company in range, 10 or whatever it may be. And you could go and add 10 annotations of the company name to your top 10 companies. And I probably should have did that for these. That would have been pretty cool, but I didn't. So those are the two routes I would use.
Okay. And then this is Igor, and Igor is on one of our live streams. So how do you know if some information is better to present in a table or in a chart? And they're thinking I can't say this methodologically.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a hard word.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to start at the very end, which is like, well, what's your goal with the data? And start with your takeaway that you want your stakeholder to know. And then with that takeaway, hopefully there's a little bit of insight that tells you whether or not it's better in a line chart, in a bar chart, in a scatter plot, or in a table all in and of itself. But start with the main message and takeaway you want to do.
Okay. And then Penelope is asking, for someone who doesn't have a degree in computer science, how can we study data analysis in a systemic way? Can you recommend some resources? Thank you.
Man, it's just absolutely great questions. Nathan, I'm gonna give you another blog post.
Okay.
Which link from Greg. Okay, cool. So I created a big, I had the same question, and I wanted to help people like understand if you're just a I know Excel and you want to get to the data analyst or wherever you want to get standpoint, there's a number of skill checkpoints along the way. And I tried my hardest to have it be a roadmap across 4 different disciplines on what you would need to do in order to gain your data skill. And those 4 different disciplines are going to be your storytelling and visualization technique, which is what we're talking about today. It's going to be your business strategy. So how can you understand a business and help understand what data is needed to drive towards that business? Number 3 is going to be your data dexterity. And that's just a fancy way of saying like can you handle a data set with 5 million rows? Can you handle a little bit of Python with your data? How is your database management? How's your schema management and all of like the more data engineering side of the house? And then the last one, which I should know very well, is going to be your statistical analysis. So we're dealing with data here. We're dealing with numbers. Data scientists are extremely strong on the statistical analysis side. They're experts in the algorithms and the very deep stats. Not everybody needs to do that. But in order to be a data analyst, it is very helpful to have some sort of foundation in the statistical analysis side. So Viz, data engineering, stats, and business acumen is where I would start.
Perfect. And Data Science Dojo team, I saw something from a live stream asking for the link to our crash course for Tableau. If you can grab that and put it in the chats there, I'd appreciate that. Our next question we already answered, which was about adding data labels next to the data points or the bubbles.
Nice.
And Shay is asking, Python use in business analytics, and I'm going to morph that a little bit to give a little more direction on the question.
Sure.
I'll say, how prevalent is Python use in business analytics?
Yeah. From what I understand, it is, and this is such a controversial answer, but it is the main library that is used outside of Excel. So by and far, Excel is 100% the most commonly used tool in business analysis. A second to that, in terms of coding languages, I would call Python. And then the third one on top of that is the cousin R. Now, the R versus Python conversation is a long one and it's controversial.
We can do another webinar on that.
We'll do another webinar to that. I'll skip right to the end and I'll tell you my preference is Python for its community support.
Okay, and then our last question will be from another anonymous attendee. How did you become a great communicator and build confidence speaking to stakeholders?
Yeah, at my, I was I previously led growth over at Salesforce for our sales and service cloud. And Salesforce was very unique in that it had an extremely strong storytelling and presentation culture. And so many different companies are guided by different kind of, communication cultures. Some are very doc heavy, some are very presentation heavy, some do others. Salesforce was awesome in that storytelling and communicating your message to your stakeholders was key. And if you were going to succeed at the company, that was something that you needed to master. And so how did it come around? I had a great manager and a great mentor, and I had a lot of reps at it. And I had a lot of failures as well. So there's no easy way to get good at it other than putting in your work and building up your skill set.
Perfect. And I think we'll end there, give you about 5 minutes to prep for whatever you're headed to. Thank you so much, Greg, and thank you for spending a little extra time with us. Thank you everyone for joining. If you filled out that form for the certificate, we received it and we will send you that certificate later today. Be sure to join us next week for that winning the room, creating and delivering an effective data-driven presentation. And again, as always, everyone have a good rest of your day.